Sometimes those inspiration boards are prompts to spark the discussion and debate and to get people to really speak into it from a personal point of view. And then sparks start to fly. Then they start to remember, oh my gosh, so it was a childhood memory that I had. Or best outside party I've ever attended was this, and this is why it was that. And in charrettes, I always like to say, hey, there are no bad ideas. We'll judge later and edit and decide, but sometimes those outlier ideas, those really creative ideas in the beginning, you never want to short circuit that, because those will encourage other people's magic and their memories to kind of get spilled out on the table. And that's what you want. You want to really tap into everybody's creativity, inspiration, experiences, and then defer judgment till the end.
Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast, a show about human environments and how they can be used as a force for good. Conversations that educate and inspire people looking for a different way to do real estate. I'm Neil Collins, and on this episode, we are joined by developer, designer, and investor Steve Beshara of Vista Growth out of Atlanta, Georgia. We've been at this collective inquiry holding the question of what is regenerative real estate for several years now. And I've got to tell you that my thinking has been all over the board and has evolved over time. You see, if you look at our website on Latitude, you see all these beautiful, ecologically rich properties that showcase themes around stewardship and sustainability. But I've come to believe that there is no such thing as a regenerative home or building. That's because you can't regenerate a thing, but you can regenerate a relationship with a place. And through that process, we can begin to make decisions about how that home, building, farm, neighborhood, or habitat can serve a greater whole. To do this work requires shifting our focus from problem solving to tapping into potential. But potential is a funny thing. At times it seems so obvious and effortless to express, but there are other times when you just cringe because you can feel and sense potential, but no matter how hard you try to coax it, it is simply a nut that does not want to crack. That's why I have a fascination with the process of getting the right people in a room and facilitating generative conversations about what could be. In the architecture world, this is called a charrette, and it is no easy feat to do well. But when it's facilitated skillfully, groups are able to bring forth ideas and projects that simply wouldn't have been possible with independent thinking. And Steve Beshara is a seasoned professional that has been facilitating these kinds of charrettes with his company Vista Growth for years. And his work has gone to impact companies and communities from across the country. I was also intrigued by Steve's history as a hobbyist developer. Now, some of you may have heard of the new urbanist agri-hood called Serenbe, located outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And if you haven't, we have a great episode on episode 21 of this show with the founder. In the aftermath of the 2008 recession, when the community was really just trying to find its roots, Steve developed the first net zero energy home in Serenbe. Certainly taking a risk considering the timing of the market as well as the general sentiment towards sustainability in the Southeast at the time. Doing something new like that is always risky. But when you are perceived as going against the cultural grain, the risk is even higher. In times like this, when outdated ways of doing things need to be composted and new ideas need to be brought forward, it is always helpful to know that there are people taking chances, pushing the envelope, and working to create more resilient communities. Okay, Steve, we are going to jump into this. Everybody, I'm really excited. We've got a longtime listener and what I can say a friend of ours of the show and of me personally of somebody that I'm fascinated with his career and appreciative of the support that we've gotten. But we have Steve Beshara from Atlanta, Georgia, founder of Vista Growth, a consummate entrepreneur. Steve, you've heard this show. I'd love to jump in and why don't you paint a colorful picture around your background before we really get into your professional world and real estate and company building, Charrettes and all that. Like let's start off with who you are as a person, where you grew up.
Sure. And also honored to be here with you. I think the things that you're doing in the leadership at Latitude is what the world needs now. So I'm a fan and a follower and delighted to get into this conversation with you guys. So I was born in Oklahoma. My parents, my father is from Oklahoma, actually a progressive minded guy who was really an educator and wanted to encourage financial aid for underprivileged high school kids to get into college. So he was a director of the college board for pretty much his entire career. My mother was an educator. She was a kind of a tough Montana girl from Bozeman, and it was really great growing up with them as our parents in Oklahoma and then a little bit in Tennessee, and then we moved to Atlanta. But having a Republican and a progressive minded person at the table, they're married together and got along for, married for 50 some odd years. But they taught us to look at both sides of a debate and to really develop a muscular, independent mind and to try to understand both sides. So I'm grateful to them. I stand on the shoulders of them and of course, my grandparents. But lived in a little town called Suwanee, Tennessee for 3 years and had this lake in our backyard. And those formative years where your brain's kind of coming together and you're creating memories. Oh my gosh, having a pond where you fish for bluegills and you catch snakes and you see the life cycle of frogs from frog eggs to tadpoles to it was fascinating to me. I mean, I felt like E.O. Wilson when he describes growing up as a child in Alabama and playing with ants. So I think we all kind of were imprinted at that sensitive age, and I was very pleased that Suwanee, Tennessee was kind of that home for me. Moved to Atlanta. Grew up in the Atlanta area, went to the University of Georgia in Athens, studied design and media, and also studied in Italy. Had the good fortune of being part of a studies abroad program in Cortona, Italy, Tuscany. So it was very mind expansive for me. Then finished school in Athens, moved to Annapolis, Maryland, got a great job offer out of school there and moved there and lived on Chesapeake Bay and fell in love with sailing and moved into a historical town that really was epitomized in a lot of ways what a European urbanism model might be like. And so kind of subconsciously that influenced my community design later. Didn't realize it at the time, but it certainly was a profound influence. And was there for a number of years, moved back to Atlanta because still family and friends, and started Vista Growth in 1997. So we're in our 26th year. And we've been all shapes and sizes. We've worked with large cap companies. We've worked with mid-sized companies. And then my favorite folks to deal with are the challenger brands, leaders that really are in the arena of entrepreneurship. They have a better idea, better mousetrap. And I love helping the underdog, help them bring the universal tenets and learnings that I've developed after working with a lot of really bright strategists and leaders in the business world. I love bringing that to early stage companies and to entrepreneurs that are in the arena doing great great courageous things. It takes a ton of courage to work against the status quo. So I find that work very gratifying, especially with community builders and developers. And so that's kind of where I am today. I've got a couple of my own little projects and developments that I am nurturing along at different levels of evolution. And so I ultimately, Neil, I sit in this intersection of creativity and commerce, and I try to bring what I've learned over time to courageous leaders who are really trying to make the world a better place. Sounds so trite, but it's so true.
One of the things that I want to just highlight as a pattern that I see of a lot of different people that have come on this show, Steve, is there's formative years of what kind of experience people have, especially in a natural environment, what really roots their childhood. And I was asked by a former guest that came on the show that said, "Hey, can we just like skip the intro and let's just get into the meat and potatoes?" And I love knowing people's stories, but I also love to see that pattern. And it's interesting because you picked up on spending time at this pond, and you also touched on media and design and business and community. And I'm curious, how do you bring that together? Because I mean, this is a show on regenerative real estate, but I want to kind of ease into that through your experience of Vista Growth, where I know that what's so incredible about that is you bring people together to create groups, to create something that's never been thought of before. What is that process like? What's been something that's coming out of that has really amazed you?
Well, to bring groups together, that part of your question is so interesting and dynamic and challenging because usually when people convene, there is a purpose. And sometimes it's drawn out of pain, or sometimes it's drawn out of just pure ambition. But there is usually some underlying force as why people need to congregate. And so in the world of real estate and community development, the people that you need to gather is really multidimensional, because to design a piece of real property and you plan to have built environment, you have municipalities to deal with, you have the land to deal with, you have climate to deal with, you have builders, you have architects, you have, at the end of the day, you have families that are betting that this community is a place where they want to live and create memories and be safe and secure and educate their children and make it better for the next generation. So there's a litany of factors to bring together for a village to really design a community. And the industry for a long time have used this process of creating or hosting a charrette. And a charrette is, it's actually, the root of it is a French word that, art gallery owners in Paris would, and, centuries ago, would walk down the art district with a cart, charrette, and artists that wanted to bring their ideas and best work for sale or consideration at the gallery, they come out and they fill the cart, the charrette, with all their ideas and all their artwork. So that's the kind of the derivative of it. Today, you bring together a lot more than artists, but you do bring that kind of artist mindset, interestingly, to it. And I have found over time, working with a lot of really talented people and a lot of different properties and developments, that my theory actually is that the best combination of folks, and we may have talked about this briefly before, but is a combination of expert minds and beginner minds. The expert minds in real estate, They have done it so many times. Let's say that you have an expert mind of 40 years in real estate. They've done many, many transactions. They've seen a lot. They've seen the problems. They've seen it all. So the expert mind, when they wake up every day, they see risk. The beginner's minds, on the other hand, when they wake up every day, because they have a more naive point of view on it, and let's say they've never been in real estate, but they have a desire to get into real estate, or actually they usually want to build a community, or they want to create a place where people are celebrated. That's usually one of the big drivers for a beginner's mind or a beginner's developer. But the beginner's mind, when they wake up every day, all they see is opportunity. So at a charrette, it's so important to have both. You can't have a room filled with beginner's minds. You could easily steer off the cliff. And if you had a room filled with expert minds, all they'll do is tell you what you can't do or why you shouldn't do it. So that pretty dynamic discussion and debate and open dialogue about really trying to sort out how can we make it better, but let's do it from an educated point of view. That helps me facilitate charrettes. And then I think the first part of your question was about natural environment and influences. I think we're all so influenced by nature, whether we want to admit it or not. I actually think that we aren't very good at articulating the impact that the natural environment has on us, but it's profound. And with some of the things that I've been getting into with Taliyama in North Georgia, a little development of our own, oh my gosh, I when I read about forest bathing years ago, I thought, well, that's pretty fascinating. You know, the Japanese kind of coined the term and they celebrated it. And I thought, well, how big of a deal is that? Well, when I really got into it and started practicing it myself up in the forest, oh my gosh, between that and my meditation practice, it has had a profound positive impact on my life. So I think nature is really the most important aspect, the natural environment, and it always starts there. So to bring the two parts of your question together, the natural environment starts, and charrettes, when you plan built environment, you have to be really sensitive and you have to really honor and be respectful of the land. If you don't, almost to your peril. I mean, Mother Nature is always in charge. She reminds me of that up in the mountains all the time. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
And as someone that loves to convene people, like, how do you make magic out of that? How do you really pull out the collective potential that's within a group? As someone that's made a career out of bringing other creatives together to build something, like what do you think some secret sauce is there?
That's a great question. I have learned over time that actually just having a wide open gathering where there is no agenda and no purpose and no loose framework, if you will, that people are generally stymied. Even the most creative people on the planet get stymied if it is entirely open-ended. So I usually come with a thesis or a hypothesis or two or three. And a lot of times we'll come with inspiration boards or inspiration concepts that rhyme with what we intend to build. And I've found that providing even a frame, even though that could be debated away during the charrette or the gathering, that people are great at responding to that and jumping in and bringing their own magic to that. I like to say that people are generally challenged to provide original thinking, but they're really great at A/B testing, telling you what they like or don't like. And sometimes those inspiration boards are prompts, and inspiration concepts are prompts to spark the discussion and debate and to get people to really speak into it from a personal point of view, and then sparks start to fly. Then they start to remember, oh my gosh, there was a childhood memory that I had, or the best outside party I've ever attended was this, and this is why it was that, and why shouldn't we design a space for everybody to gather that does this, and what was the best backyard experience I've ever had. So everybody then starts to bring their magic in, and that dynamic discussion you want to be able to embrace, celebrate. And in charrettes, I always like to say, hey, there are no bad ideas. We'll judge later. The adults can show up at the very end, and we'll start to make some decisions and edit and decide, well, that's a little too crazy. That really doesn't fit with where we're going. But sometimes those outlier ideas, those really creative ideas in the beginning, you never want to short circuit that, because those will encourage other people's magic and their memories to kind of get spilled out on the table. And that's what you want. You want to really tap into everybody's creativity, inspiration, experiences, and then defer judgment till the end, and bring the adults in and make kind of edit down to the essence. That's kind of what I've followed. That aligns with a lot of design thinking processes that David Kelly introduced years ago at IDEO.
How do you make sure you get the right people, that right blend of the expert mind and the beginner mind in the same group? Because I can so easily see, you miss one or two key stakeholders, and a project can become a completely different thing and miss the essence. If you're to go, have a different group of stakeholders in a charrette.
Yeah, that is a pretty lengthy strategic conversation. Our pre-charrette work is pretty extensive, and that we will consider, we tear up a whiteboard. We have Post-its, we put down people, per Post-it, someone's name, subject matter experts. We need people from finance. We need architects. We need planners. We need urban specialists. We need people from the community. We need builders. We need municipalities. So it's a multi-dimensional roster of folks that then get kind of curated to the most potent charrette roster. And the other thing is that I've learned over time is that even though it's messier, I err to bringing in more of the community than less, because I like to say that no one's as smart as everyone. And when you really tap into the collective wisdom of people in the community, kind of the wisdom of the village, I promise you're going to get closer to success than if you try to rely on a few lone expert individuals that are considered uber talented folks. So there was a guy named Dr. Stephen Covey years ago. He wrote in his famous book of his, but it's always stuck with me over the years. But he said, no involvement, no commitment. And I've found that so true in charrettes, that you bring more people in because they feel as though they have, even in a small way, some thumbprint on the development of this. Then they're an advocate. But if they're left outside the room and don't have a seat at the table, they could easily work against you or throw stones at your concept. So you want to build positive momentums. That's why it's kind of a messy process. But hearings, when you get a city council together and they want to hear from the public. Some people think that that's a certain form of torture, and it kind of is in a way. And in the other respect, you really have to give voice to people in the community to come and say their piece. Sometimes they show up with pitchforks, and sometimes they are such a strong advocate for what you're doing. But you really need to go through that process. You can't skip that. You really have to listen.
Yeah, the public forum is one of those where it does not create the conditions for emergence or imagination.
Yes. So
well,
true.
Steve,
the thing that I find so fascinating is like you take this kind of business building, brand building, community building into another dimension because it's not just theoretical for you. You ventured out into your own real estate ventures. And I'm curious how that has evolved over your career from maybe the first project you got involved with, and then we'll graduate up to what you had talked about before of Taliyama and what you're looking to do there. But how did you get into real estate?
Hmm. Oh, that's a great nostalgic question. So my first real estate transaction was up on the Chesapeake Bay. And I was living and renting in a little town called Annapolis, Maryland, famous for the U.S. Naval Academy right there on the Chesapeake, and charming little downtown and very expensive, very premium. And I was renting just this tiny little efficiency apartment. I remember sitting at a restaurant listening to, I think there were two real estate agents and an investor. And the one real estate agent said, God is not making any more waterfront real estate. And I thought, okay, everyone's probably heard that before, or some derivative of that. But they were talking about why the prices were getting premium and that it was really supply and demand, just simple Econ 101, where you have very limited supply and demand can go up. And so I thought, well, I don't have any money. I have $500. It's hardly, nothing. And I'm going to take a couple of days off of work and I'm going to go look for waterfront real estate. So here I am as a beginner's mind, naive, thinking that I'm going to, by some form of magic or willful force, find a piece of real estate, waterfront real estate that I could afford. Could not. I realized in the first hour or two how foolhardy that was, but I was pretty determined. And I ended up finding a little water view piece of land on Kent Island, which is across Chesapeake Bay on the other side of Maryland's eastern shore. And that had a little handmade for sale sign on it. I called the number and it was an older couple that lived in the neighborhood. They had the land they were going to give it to their son, but their son moved away, wasn't interested. So they put it up for sale. I called them. I said, can I come visit you? I paid them a visit. I said, I'm Steve. I have $500 in my name. I really would love to find a way to buy this piece of property. And would you consider owner financing? I'll just pay you the note. You be the bank. And they got so nervous. I mean, my goodness, they thought that I was trying to reach in their pocket and like steal something or so. But they talked to their I don't know, cousin or someone, and they said, oh yeah, people do that all the time. And you just write up a legal document, which we did. And they ended up selling it to me. I put $500 down. I made a payment of $181.82 every month, which was a stretch for me. That was painful, but I was doing that. This was in the mid 80s. And over a year or two, developed a relationship with the local banker who did the mortgages on the island, Kent Island, and said, I'm determined to build a house. I have this Amish family that's going to build it. Here's the housing design, but I don't have the money to build it. And he said, well, you can leverage the equity you have in your land. And I said, what? What's that all about? And so he said, I'll send an appraiser out. And so I realized that the value of the land for which I bought it a year earlier had almost doubled in value. So that equity on that water view piece of property, I used as the down payment on the construction loan. And so fast forward a few months, the house is built and I knew what my note was. And there was like some anxiety and consternation about that, but also as everyone in building their first house gets that huge amp of enthusiasm. So it was anxiety, enthusiasm, and I'm got the key going into the door the first time, and a guy pulls up and he said, "I've been waiting for you. Are you the owner?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I've been waiting for this house to get built because I'd like to make an offer on it. Is it a spec house?" I said, "No, I plan on living here." Well, he said, "I'd be willing to pay X for it," which was almost twice of my note. And I thought, oh my gosh, this real estate is kind of an interesting, fascinating, dynamic thing. And I really saw that moment where it could be for a kind of a poor kid, that it could be a wealth creation event if used properly. So that was the beginning of my real estate investment.
Before we get back into this episode, I want to take a second to express my gratitude for you, the listener. Producing this show has been a real labor of love for me, and it has connected me with people and organizations doing amazing things from across the globe. We've had people invest in projects as a result of this show, new teams have been formed, and careers have been changed. And the fun part for me is that we're nowhere close to realizing the potential of this show. In order to do that, we are looking to partner with value-aligned brands and companies that hold a vision for a resilient, regenerative, and beautiful world. For the first time ever, we are opening up spots for brands to advertise on this show and through our other platforms that we have at Latitude Regenerative Real Estate, like our journal and our webinars. This is a great way to get your company message out to an incredible group of visionaries, culture creators, and people from across the globe. We're going to be running special rates for spring and summer months as we gear up for the second annual Regenerative Real Estate Gathering happening at the end of August. To find out more, you can visit our media offering on Latitude's website at chooselatitude.com or send us an email at team@chooselatitude.com.
One of the things that we initially linked up on was you built, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, the first net zero house in Serenbe. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. It was a Bosch idea house that I purchased. And this was maybe a dozen years ago, and had always been enamored with Serenbe, know the town founders, and had been down and been kind of evaluating it for a number of years. And at the tail end of the recession, I thought, well, it's time, it'd be worthwhile to invest down there. And so it was a Bosch idea house, and in pursuit of net zero. And South Face Institute, a local sustainability advocacy group, had really worked out the solar, geothermal, smart appliances, all the factors to try to get it to net zero. But with new construction, you don't have any history yet of what your energy consumption is. So it's kind of a bet on net zero.
Well, Steve, I don't want to call out the 800-pound pink gorilla in the corner here, but we both come from the South. And net zero then, just like it is today, it's marginally better today. I don't want to just cast the entire South out of this conversation. But net zero it's not really a common held value of this is where we need to move towards. So why go out on a limb like that? Why say this is something that I want to do, especially if no one else in that community was doing it at that time?
Well, I think a number of things. I think intellectually and theoretically, I knew that reduced energy consumption was a good thing. Means, in theory, there are fewer fossil fuels. And why not use solar energy? My goodness, how natural. It doesn't get any more natural than that. So there were 18 solar panels on my rooftop. And so I, in theory, loved renewable energies, but this is where I'm, I guess, crazy enough to be a pioneer. I had no practical experience. So this was kind of an experiment for me to actually see if net zero could be achieved. And I'll tell you, there was a moment when, they were finishing up the house, and I went to the builder, said, "Hey, come with me." We go to the side of the building where you have your meter. And this was a digital meter, and it was for a net zero home, not your typical dial meter, but it was on a gorgeous sunny day, and the meter was going backwards. The digital readout was going in reverse. And oh my God, I was so goosed by that moment to realize that the house was producing more energy than it was consuming on that bright sunny day. And I'm like, oh my God, this is fantastic. Can't get enough of it. And so solar is interesting, but there's trade-offs to solar energy as a renewable. But geothermal is the one that I'm in love with, because that's just really tapping into earth sciences. You get under 6 feet of earth and it's 55 degrees consistently underground, and you really leverage what Mother Nature is giving us as temperature, and it properly converted brings it into the home and helps moderate and reduce the energy consumption by 20 to 60%.
Did you build that property on spec, or were you planning on living there? What was the
the builder started it. Mac McKinney was the builder. He started it, and I think it was on spec. I really, honestly, he had already pretty much built it before I bought it. And he had, I think that he was just trying to keep his crew, he was trying to keep his band together. At the end of the recession, there weren't many sales, so they had spec homes as an option. And boy, double courageous for him, because not only was it a spec home at the end of a recession, but it was innovation. And, it's not, not everybody wants solar panels on their rooftop. Some people see it as risk. But so I bought it from Mac McKinney Builders, great guys. And then I remember a conversation I had a year later when Bosch called. I've been in touch with them, and they said, "Oh my gosh, we've been waiting for a year to pass. And will you please give us the update? Did we even get close to zero?" Because the whole idea, the whole goal was to have it generate enough energy that it would completely neutralize the power bill on the grid. So zero was the goal. And I said, "Guys, I'll share everything with you. Here are the past 12 power bills, and they averaged $27 a month." And I said, "Guys, you should be really proud, because it's not zero, but I think you got pretty darn close to zero." So, and of course, now today, 12 years later, the technology is way better. It's cheaper for solar. And so that's why I'm hopeful about renewables really being a part of the conversation to make the world a better place, less reliance on fossil fuels. And so that's how I got into the net zero home.
And I know you've got a lot of real estate experience that we haven't even touched upon. Where do you see the industry going from here? I mean, it could be anybody's game right now. We know that we need to go in this direction of renewables and things like that. But what really catches your eye as you survey the landscape?
Yeah, because we're at a very interesting time. We're talking in the first quarter of 2023, and we're brand new off of closing the books of 2022, a year where real estate has had a dramatic shift. And the shift is really driven by the fact of cost of capital. I mean, the investments rates have doubled within a very short period of time. So here in the South, it has really hit the brakes. I don't want to say the faucet's turned off, but it has slowed pretty dramatically. I think it's coming back around now. But I think that as far as the tea leaves for the market, And I think real estate is really a regional game and ultimately a local game. But I think that people are going to be more discerning about their primary home. It is their primary emotional space. And we've learned with COVID that it really is your safe zone and it's your center of wellness and health. And if you can't be healthy and protect your family at home, the world's not right for anybody. So I think that wellness and health have moved up to kind of the top of the list for concerns still post, even though, COVID's still out there, but the majority of the ferocious impact is past. So I think health and wellness, the workforce has changed a lot. People are remote, people are mobile, people work at home a lot. So the dining room has dropped off. It's like Darwinism. It's dropped off the floor plan. Or that space is turned into a home office where you can safely do a great Zoom and kind of operate at home. So the home is carrying a lot more responsibilities than it has in the past. I think people are very much more discerning about it. And my hope is that people embrace communities that celebrate renewable energy or build with things like Earthcraft home standards, use foam insulation, really in baby steps or in giant steps, really improve how the built environment comes into being and with a sensitivity on the planet, because we've really got to protect this big chunk of rock floating through our solar system.
Certainly. I know that you've got Taliama and you've got Surroundabee, these two properties that you're really looking to do something with. What do you see as the role of conservation or of agriculture within future developments that you plan on doing?
Yeah, that's interesting. So they're both very different. Taliama is in the North Georgia mountains. Technically, it's among called an acidic cove forest. So the soil is very acidic, but it is so rich. Oh my gosh, the soil there, because it's just been virgin forest for a long period of time. But it's such a dense piece of forest. It's so moist up there. I've got 2 creeks and a couple of waterfalls in it. It's beautiful, pristine forest land, but as far as agriculture goes, it's not a big opportunity. There are certain things that are kind of indigenous to the place or things that will work, native plants, but it's kind of a shorter list. It's not farmland per se. So agriculture is a very limited aspect to Taliama. The Meanwhile Meadow, which is a property which is about a half a mile from Serenbe, in that area we call Surroundabee, and it is 23 acres of farmland that has been fertilized by cows for a few decades. It used to be row crops, beans and others, and part of it, according to Mr. Hearn's family, prior owners, they said watermelon and other crops were grown there. But this land, beautiful rolling hills, fertilize the soil. In fact, there are a couple of your colleagues was honored to have in town recently, and Mark Voss, organic farmer out of Wisconsin, and Matthew, a local guy here in Atlanta. My gosh, to hear their analysis of the soil, it's so fun for a naive guy like me to be there with expert minds, where first thing they do, they hop out of the car and go over to this patch of grass and scratch away the grass and dig up the soil and hold it in their hand. They're analyzing it. And it's great to hear that dialogue and realize that soil is special. It's not dirt, it's soil. We really need to be mindful of the difference between dirt and soil. and protect and honor the soil. So that is got enormous agricultural possibilities. And what we're trying to do is, and we're probably working up to, this is kind of pre-charrette work where we're learning and benchmarking other communities of similar shapes and sizes. And we're studying things like permaculture, studying things like gravel gardens. We're studying all kinds of things in this benchmarking phase where we think that we want to learn the latest, greatest thinking from humankind, and what aspects of that can we pour into Meanwhile Meadow.
Do you find that this is motivated by your values or by the opportunity, by the market? Like what? It's not very often. Like 10 years ago, if you would have told me that a developer was talking about permaculture, I would have been floored.
Yes.
Right. I mean, it's just, that was a word that wasn't in mainstream lexicon. But now here we are, we're talking about, hey, this is a part of the process that we're looking at and part of the possibility. And it just is so incredible that we're at that point in time. But what do you think motivates you? And then what do you think will motivate others to follow step?
Yeah, I know what motivates me. I think it's probably two or three things. Some highly emotional, others more rational, intellectual. But I draw a lot of energy and excitement from being at the edge of a frontier, right at the threshold of a place to be pioneers that's ripe with opportunity. Also, there's, risks and fraught with challenges, but it excites me personally to be at the edge of the frontier. So I draw a lot of energy from that. Another thing that motivates me, I would have to say, going back to my grandfather, he was a grocer in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and ended up having some grocery stores there. But it was all about the produce. It was all about growing things from the land. I just loved to visit him as a child because in his backyard, the front of the house looks like any other house among a streetscape, but the backyard was amazing. He had 20 chickens. He had fruit trees. He had this massive fig tree. He had apricots. He had, green space. He had all kinds of things in he had a little farmette in his backyard. And I just remember how self-sustaining that was, and to go out there every morning and get eggs. And those were the eggs that we had for breakfast. And so to actually push the dots close together like that, where you kind of live off the land and in your built environment, your primary emotional space, was a big influence on me. I didn't really realize it at the time. I just thought that's kind of how the world worked, but I encourage that. That's what we're going to do at Meanwhile Meadows, have chickens and, livestock and permaculture and all those things. Celebrate the bounty of the land. So I enjoy that. And honestly, it's not my primary motivator, but I do know that intellectually that if things aren't economically sustainable, that you can put a lot of pressure on yourself. So I also want to generate value in these kinds of developments so that I can sustain themselves for me. And, I see it as being a temporary steward for next generations. That's why putting some of the Taliyama in conservation is a good thing. Meanwhile Meadow is already in conservation, but I have about 3 acres that I can develop now while it's in conservation. So my hope is that the market also respects and appreciates the time and effort into making these lovable, sustainable places.
Yeah, that's amazing. Something that's coming up in my world a lot, and we live in very different parts of the country. Atlanta's, I would say, is a lot more affordable than the Pacific Northwest, where land costs are just so high. But one of the things that I see as so powerful in real estate is listening to what you talked about. If you bought your first piece of land And even within the first year, it doubled in value. If you start to compound that over a number of decades, what we face in the Pacific Northwest is just like there's not enough affordable land and homes for the demand there. So is that part of your, I don't know, underwriting of how a project should come together, or is that something that you think these projects need to be focused on and holding that aspect, or is it the case of like a Tesla? It's almost like you needed Tesla to come into the marketplace first as this luxury electric vehicle, so that then it spurs all this other innovation to create the more economical all-electric sedan. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that kind of prompts a few things in my mind that I've experienced with brand building, whether they're business-oriented brands or consumer-facing brands, is that the American marketplace really benefits the courageous leader that starts with a premium product, and use Tesla as an example. And Apple, everybody talks about Apple and uses a lot of their economic examples. But when the iPhone or when iPods or any, you could probably name 50 companies and 50 products, but it's better, or it rewards the market and the maker to start at premium and then over time come down market. It's very hard to start down market and try to go up market. Very challenging in brand building. Now, when we talk about place branding, that's different. I think place branding is when we build story and a brand and an essence around the community, around the place, and it's got natural environment, it's got built environment. And I've learned over time that the best communities, the healthiest communities, are diverse. They have diverse product types, they have diverse price points. So it's not you start it all at premium and then come down market. It actually is healthiest if there is a balance of product types at different points of entry economically for buyers. When you are in a situation, or any developers in a situation where they have to ship in workers and labor force to sustain and work the restaurants or the shops or things like that, because they can't afford to live in that neighborhood or they can't afford to live close by, that means that the gears are out of whack. And so diversity of product type is so important, I think, and it promotes healthy communities. There's a lot written on that. I'm not the only one saying that. There are many others that I think would agree with that. So I know affordable housing is so darn difficult in today's world. And I hear so much about it. I know that it is a great ambition to create more. And this is where you have to actually have some government prompting of tax credits or intervention in a way. Because when the market and developers are taking the risk to develop a community, a property, they want to realize a certain return. And including affordable housing changes their pro forma. So sometimes they don't care primarily about the health and diversity of the neighborhood. They care about the bottom line more. So affordable housing, so darn difficult. Everybody talks about it, but honestly, I don't see it happening that much, regrettably. Unfortunately, it's kind of disappointing because the market forces are so strong to create returns, because anybody in real estate knows that there's another cycle coming around. So they're sensitive to the returns. So I don't have clear answers on affordable housing, other than I know that it is of benefit to all communities to have a healthy proportion of affordable housing. So my hope is that people, when they design communities, they just are mindful of what is the healthiest for society, for themselves, because they're taking the risk, and and the long term.
Well, this is what gets me excited, and I think this puts a really beautiful bow on it, is that by putting light on this, as well as putting process to it of what you do through Vista Growth, of how do you get the beginner's mind and the expert mind? How do you get enough people in the room to create the conditions for solutions that we never even thought possible before? Because I'm in the similar boat of like, how on earth do we actually bring these disparate things together that often work not very well together, of like, we want these amenities, but then it goes up in price. And it's been a real head scratcher for me for a long time. And I know other real estate professionals are in the same boat. And now there's this like glimmer of like, okay, there's a couple different tools maybe, but we're not quite sure which ones to use at what time. But I do think that there is just the real need for facilitators to be bringing groups together to work on this. And if it's a charrette, or if it's a community or development or whatever the holding container of that is, man, we need more of that, because now's the time for innovation. So Steve, I think that what you're doing is so fascinating. It's really amazing to see how you've blended design with business, with brand building, to now placemaking. And it's just such a treat to see you on that growth edge and watch that those pioneering moves. So it's amazing to just be witness to the journey. And I appreciate you coming on to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Neil. As I said at the outset, it's an honor. I think what you all are doing at Latitude is advancing the conversation. You're setting a stage for I think enlighten folks to bring the best practices so that we can really make a better planet, a better built environment, and make it all work. So thanks for having me. Real pleasure, and continued success to you guys.
If you want to follow our work at Latitude, you can follow us on Instagram at latitude.regenerative.re, and mine is at I am Neil Collins. We inherently believe in the potential that comes from connecting value-aligned and purpose-driven people together in community. That's why I encourage you to join our mighty network and introduce yourself to the other people working across the globe to advance a more regenerative, resilient, and beautiful world. Here, we want to know what you're working on and what inspires you. Through this platform, you can attend live events, take courses provided by our podcast guests, and create connection with other people and businesses that share your same passion. To join, find the link in our show notes or visit our website at chooselatitude.com. If you'd like to support the show, please share it with your friends and be sure to follow us on your podcast app so that you always have the latest episode downloaded. Another way to support our regenerative field building is to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Positive ratings help attract amazing guests, and they can be the deciding factor for someone else to tune in and listen. And who knows? Maybe this is the kind of motivation that it takes for them to finally decide to align their profession with their sustainable and regenerative values and become a positive force for good within their own community. This show was produced by myself and edited by Anthony Wallace and offered as a part of our work with Latitude Regenerative Real Estate.